Good morning. Welcome to your early morning intuitive guidance. I'm Dr. Bonnie Nussbaum, here with some words of wisdom to start your day off well. And I have to tell you, Facebook is messing with us again. So the orientation on this is different than what it typically is because there is no longer the flip screen button. So everything I show you now is going to be backwards instead of oriented correctly. Good morning, Jo Neal. Glad you are here. Welcome, welcome. Also, because the screen is now vertical, it's going to be hard to read comments because there's this much space instead of this much space. So I'm not sure why. And interestingly, I'll turn it once just so you can see what happens. Oh, it says you can't turn your phone while recording. Anywho, good morning. Let's see, Gwen's here. Good morning, good morning. Anyway, when I turn it when it's not recording, what it does is dull out the picture. So notice how bright I am. Good morning, Chrissy K. Glad you are here. Good morning, Abigail. Welcome, welcome. Notice how bright this is. It's not that way. When you turn it, it goes dark. So I'm not sure what Facebook has up its sleeve, but I think maybe this is to accommodate the Instagram thing better. I don't know. Anyway, you get what you get. Here's what we get today. So again, when I hold up the book, my guess is you're seeing things backwards because I can't find the flip screen. But we shall muddle on, shall we not? Yes, technology. Shrug the shoulders, move on anyway. So I hope you're all off to a good start on this fine Tuesday. Very brisk here. I think with the wind chill, we're like -9. Yeah, not much. And I need to go out today. Yesterday I could avoid going out, which was fabulous, but today I need to go out, and then tomorrow's supposed to be chilly. Good morning, Nancy. I'm being the weatherman right now. And, the book was upside down also. Am I upside down? That'll be lovely. See, watch, I can do this upside down. Whatever. Hello, Catherine. Glad you are here. Good morning, good morning. So we'll see what this does, and if it's a total mess, maybe Morgan will be able to make adjustments while she's laughing at my ineptitude at tech. Anywho, we're moving on with Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart, and we have another awesome section to read. But let's start with some breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I'm glad it's just the book that's upside down. In through the nose, out through the mouth. And one more for good measure. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Yes, she is. Good morning, Cindy. Welcome. Morgan is of that generation that tech is a natural. So here's my upside down book again. Backwards book. Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart. And we are on the third part of the trifecta that she says we can use to influence the quality of our communication. So this one is Practicing Story Stewardship. Story Stewardship. And Cindy, if you wouldn't mind, there's a couple of parts in here that are really cool, if you wouldn't mind putting in the definitions when we get there of narrative takeover and narrative tap out. So I'll attempt to remember to cue you when we get there. But here we go. One more breath. Awesome. Okay. Practicing story stewardship. I'm going to start this section by acknowledging that I have been wrong about something for years. For 2 decades, I've said we need to understand emotion so we can recognize it in ourselves and others. Without exaggeration, I've said this thousands of times, and I've heard it from other researchers at least that much. Well, let me go on record right now. I no longer believe that we can recognize emotion in other people, regardless of how well we understand human emotion and experience or how much language we have. Good morning, Brenda. Welcome from Canada. So basically she's saying I was wrong. How powerful is that? There are a whole lot of people that you can't get them to admit they were wrong if their life depended on it. She's saying she's wrong. What a strong woman. We can own our mistakes, can we not? So, why have I stopped believing that we can recognize emotion in other people? 2 reasons. First, too many emotions and experiences present the exact same way. There's no way to know through observation if your tears come from grief, despair, hopelessness, or resentment, just to name a few. Absolutely no way. 2, while research shows there are some universal facial expressions for a small number of emotions, how we express what we're feeling and experiencing can be as unique as we are. So how do we know what other people are feeling? Ready? Drum roll. We ask them. It's only then that we are able to connect with the grounded confidence, which was the first part, to engage, and the courage, which is the second part, to walk alongside. And now here's the third part, practicing story stewardship. When they tell us what they're feeling, what happened, what they fear or desire, we listen and we become trusted stewards of their story. Story stewardship means honoring the sacred nature of story, the ones we share and the ones we hear. And knowing that we've been entrusted with something valuable and that we have something valuable that we should treat with respect and care. We are good stewards of the stories we tell by trusting them to people who have earned the right to hear them. Good morning, Mel. Glad you're here. Hear that again. Not everybody has earned the right to hear our stories. And in fact, some people have made it abundantly clear that they cannot be trusted with their stories. So we are good stewards of the stories we tell by trusting them to people who have earned the right to hear them and telling them only when we are ready. So not allowing someone to dig our story out of us. Honor your timing. Honor your timing. We are good stewards of the stories we hear by listening, being curious, affirming, and believing people when they tell us how they experience something. It's not our place to tell someone how they're looking at something is wrong. They may get there on their own, the same way she realized that for 2 decades she's been putting something out there that isn't now accurate or wasn't accurate, and she wants us to know she's figured that out. How awesome, right? So remember we talked about near enemies and far enemies, and far enemies being behaviors that are diametrically opposed to what would be useful, helpful, loving in that circumstance. So if compassion would be what's useful, loving, and kind, we are cruel. So it's a far enemy. We can pick those out very easily. Near enemies are something that almost makes it there but doesn't. And it may look like it's creating connection when it's actually designed to create disconnection. And we're going to talk more about that in this part. Okay? So the near enemy of practicing story stewardship is performing connection while driving disconnection. So now she's going to explain what that means. Performative connection means that we're acting interested or invested, but there's more going on under the surface that's really driving disconnection and separation. So like if you've got the storyline going in your head as you're listening to something, how dumb was he? Why the hell did he do that? That's really stupid. That's this. You're looking, yeah, okay. And underneath you got this narrative going that's disconnecting you from the person telling the story. The issues that most of us struggle with are being the knower, advice giving, and problem solving. I'd throw judgment in there as well. Problem solving is tough because some people do want help. The best story stewardship in these moments is to just say, I'm grateful that you're sharing this with me. What does support look like? I can listen and be with you. I can help problem solve or whatever else you need. You tell me. So it's not well, what you ought to do is, that's not it. So now here are the two not topics, that'd be a word, points that I want to see if we can capture this, because this stuff was like, I read this and I went, oh, I do that stuff. So the best way to figure out how to not do that stuff is to learn what that stuff is, right? Gets us rolling on the path. She says, The greatest threat to story stewardship is the two near enemies of building narrative trust: narrative takeover and narrative tap out. We'll read about those. I'll explain what those are. Rather than building trust by acknowledging, affirming, and believing, we shut people down when we feel discomfort or disinterest, or when we take over the narrative and make it about us or our perception of what happened. There are examples of both of these in the graphic comic strip that Gavin developed for us, which you'll find in a few pages. So we'll see how it works in terms of flipping the book around so you can see stuff. So narrative tap-outs can range from subtle disinterest to complete shutdown. If we had thought bubbles, they would say, "This is too uncomfortable," or "I don't care enough about you to care about this," or "I can't take this on right now. Like, my cup is too full, I can't take on something from your cup." If the reason we're tapping out is that last one, "I can't take that on right now," it's much better to say that than to diminish someone's story. Okay? Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it. My friend Nancy did this with me at one point. I can't remember what the crisis was in my life, but I called her and she said, I just got a health diagnosis and I really can't be present for you. Good morning, Cheryl. That was so helpful. I'm sure some of you would think, oh my God, that'd be terrible if someone said that to me. No. Because do you think I wouldn't have picked up anyway that she had one foot in the conversation and one foot out? Absolutely, I would have picked that up. And my mind might have read that as she doesn't care about me. No, it was she's preoccupied with her own recent diagnosis, which she had not shared with me yet, that she can't help me carry my story right now. So be it. That was such a wise thing she did. It sounds weird, but we can tap out of sharing our own stories too. Often this is about lack of grounded confidence that our stories matter, or a lack of self-trust about when and how we share them. So when we tell ourselves, well, I could call Nancy and share this with her. Well, she's probably busy, blah, blah, blah. It's not a big hairy deal, really. We diminish our own stories. Okay? Tapping out of stewardship of someone else's story can feel like betrayal. And tapping out of sharing our own story feels like betraying ourselves. Narrative takeover is a huge problem in our world. It impacts one-on-one conversations and cultural conversations. Rather than being good stewards of the story, we hijack the story and center ourselves in the middle of it. That centering takes many different shapes, including shifting the focus to us, questioning or not believing what someone is sharing because it's different than our lived experience, or diminishing the importance of an experience because it makes us feel uncomfortable, or worse, complicit. So let me give you an example. If I, as a woman, am uncomfortable walking to the grocery store, the 7-Eleven, at 10 o'clock at night, and I share that with a male friend, if that makes him uncomfortable, it's not his experience. He'd walk around whenever, right? He may diminish that. Well, you're making a big deal out of nothing. I'm sure it's really safe, blah, blah, blah. That's that thing. Or that person might go, well, that's not my experience. I'd walk over there. It's not a big hairy deal. They've centered the story in themselves, and it diminishes my experience. It's a disconnecting from my experience. And could my experience be different than someone else's experience? Absolutely. And when there's a line in here that I really want us to capture, and I'll flag it, and it's coming up, that here where people are at, yes, oftentimes it makes us very uncomfortable. But here where people are, we do this all the time to people who are grieving the death of somebody, right? You have my sympathy, you have my sympathy, you have my sympathy. Be with people in their grief. It's so uncomfortable for a lot of us. We just don't know how to do it. And so we fluff something off that would make a world of difference if we could just sit and be there. We don't have to fix it. We don't have to do anything different. We just sit there. Just be. Okay? When we reject the truth of someone's story, the ultimate failure of story stewardship, it's often because we've stealthily centered ourselves in their story, and the narrative takeover is about protecting our ego, behavior, or privilege. So here's the line that I want to make sure we capture, Cindy. The less diverse our lived experiences, the more likely we are to find ourselves struggling with narrative takeover or narrative tap out. So the less worldly we are, the more likely it is we're going to get caught in this trap. Which is why many of us took our kids traveling, took our kids to Cozumel at one point, and we were driving up in the mountains to see a rainforest, and there were all these little huts built into the side of the mountain, and these chutes, which was for raw sewage. And my daughter looked up, she was 8 at the time, she looked up and she goes, "Are there people living there?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "We are so lucky." I said, "Yes, we are. Yes, we are." When we don't have experience with a lot of diversity, can you see how easy it is to get stuck in framing everything through our own experience? I know I've done it. Absolutely. That awareness that everyone's experience is not the same, and honoring someone else's experience. And sometimes we do want to write it off because it makes us so uncomfortable. When I lived in the UP, the Native American experience, when people were sitting around the Wabano Lodge, sharing stories, the discomfort, especially the stories when people had been or had family members who were in the Indian schools, where they took children away from their parents and put them in these schools. Basic gist was, kill the Indian, save the man. That was the theme. Much of that is just beginning to come out now, but bearing witness to the pain that people experienced because of that stuff was, we need practice. We need to be taught how to hold space for someone who's in pain. Not try to fix it, not try to, dismiss it, but hold space for their pain. Frankly, I will tell you, some of the best therapy and coaching sessions I've had have been when I pretty much shut my mouth and let someone talk. And the first time that happened, I remember sitting there and I was thinking, man, I am just not being helpful here. I'm just not being... And at the end of the session, that person said, "Thank you so much. This was so helpful. I feel so much better." And I began to realize just being present is far more important than having the right answer, okay? And I can see that you guys are writing things, and because of how this this new orientation on the phone is, it gives me a little bit, and then it says see more. So I can't even really get the whole of what you're putting out there. Talk about Facebook interfering with communication, right? So what I will do is, after the fact, when I go back and read everything and reply, that's where I can give you whatever feedback I have about it, or validate what you're saying, or etc. But it's a little difficult with this setup. So again, I'm going to repeat that line and then move into a next piece which demonstrates that. The less diverse our lived experiences, the more likely we are to find ourselves struggling with narrative takeover or narrative tap out. Okay? A cultural example of narrative takeover is the Black Lives Matter movement. This is a life-affirming accountability movement to call attention to the violence being perpetrated against Black people. But rather than listening, learning, and believing the stories of injustice, systemic racism, and pain, groups of white people centered themselves with All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. Now here's the important part. Hear this loud and clear. The Black Lives Matter movement was never a narrative about white lives or police lives not mattering. This was an attempt to, so this All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter was an attempt to once again decenter Black lives and take over the narrative. That's what that was. And if right now you feel defensive and uncomfortable, makes total sense. Good morning, Laura. Glad you're here. And if you haven't read the book White Fragility, get a hold of it. It's one of those books that it's so important that we understand how we do this, but it makes you really uncomfortable as you're reading it. You're going, yeah, I do that. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, there's an example of where I did that, etc., etc. So, like empathy, story stewardship is not walking in someone else's shoes. It's being curious and building narrative trust as they tell you about the experience of them being in their own shoes. That's what you're receiving. Okay? That's what you're receiving. It's about believing people when they tell you what an experience meant to them. And again, and I'm going to say this next line and then I'm going to give you my example. The far enemy of narrative trust is fueling narrative distrust and diminishing the humanity of others and ourselves. Why ourselves? Because when we are reckless with people's stories, we diminish our own humanity. That's a great one too, Cindy, if you could capture that one. When we are reckless with people's stories, we diminish our own humanity. And a group of people where I often see recklessness with other people's stories is marital couples where one has cheated. That person is obviously oftentimes uncomfortable with their partner's distress over their infidelity. And so they want to, in therapy or wherever else, fluff it off, fix it, make it okay fast because they're uncomfortable. And oftentimes I've had to say to the partner who's cheated, you got to suck it up. You got to hear this. As long as your partner needs to say it, you've got to be present. Thank you, Cindy. You've got to be present for the words he or she is sharing with you. You engaged in a hugely betraying behavior. Now you need to be culpable. So basically, cowboy up and deal with your discomfort. And so oftentimes I'd be saying to the partner who had cheated and just wanted to get this over with, breathe, take a breath. You know, they were so defensive and, well, you know, you had a part in this too and blah, blah, you know, all the stuff. So now we are finally to this little cartoon. I'm going to take the cover off the book because I think that's going to be easier. This little cartoon. And again, I think it's going to be harder to share in this vertical orientation, but we're going to do it. Good morning, Diane. Glad you are here. So basically, this is showing us cultivating meaningful connection, which is the new theory that she's putting forth, and the various parts of that where it can go well or it can run amok. And again, the words are probably going to be backwards, which is a bummer, but good morning, Michelle. Glad you are here. So we are doing, and sorry for the backwards, but at least then you can see the pictures and I'll read the rest of it. Cultivating meaningful connection. So there is the supervisor and the woman who actually gave a talk. Good morning, Lisa. Welcome, welcome. So the way the conversation goes is this. The supervisor is asking the other young woman, how did your presentation go? It went okay. Why just okay? I stayed up all night planning for it. This was my big moment, and it just didn't feel right. So now our first little response here is a narrative tap out, okay? I'm sure it was great. Hey, what time is our next meeting? Opt out, not being present, okay? So that was the narrative tap out response. The cultivating meaningful connection response is, say more. Help me understand what didn't feel right. You really worked hard putting it together, so what felt weird? Can you see how that's going to open up conversation instead? At the bottom here, the young woman is explaining why it didn't feel right. And here's a picture of her doing her presentation. She says, "I'm glad you asked me that. It almost felt like I was talking to myself. No one was even looking at me or making eye contact. It was like I could have been in the room by myself." Okay, first response we get is a narrative tap out. "Yeah, sometimes we feel like that when we give talks, so I'll see you at noon for the next meeting." Miss. Here's the cultivating meaningful connection one. "Wait, are you saying that you gave this presentation that you've been working on for 2 months and you felt invisible in there?" "Yes, that is exactly the word I would use, invisible." And then she says, "I know that of course nobody in the room looks like me, but even as I was making the presentation, nobody asked me questions. They looked over at Brad instead of me. Afterwards, when people said good job, they were saying it into the space and to each other. So I was really deflated." Okay? So now we have, at the very bottom here, a narrative takeover. "Well, it sounds like you might be a little sensitive. Do you think that you're exaggerating?" And of course, this is her supervisor. So wouldn't you want to lunge across the desk at her? "I'm sure you did a great job. Even I get sensitive after a big moment." Taking over the story. Okay. Here's the cultivating meaningful connection. "Okay, so I just want to play this back to make sure I'm tracking here. You gave this presentation. No one made eye contact with you. They asked Brad the follow-up questions, and then they didn't look at you?" So she's connecting. Then we get another narrative takeover right here, which is, "That's bullshit. I'm going to call those people into my office right now, and we're going to have a CTJ, baby. We're going to have a come to Jesus, because nobody treats people on my team like that. And you know what? I'm with you, sister." So I want to show you this picture right here. She's got her little halo on, her little banner, right? And the halo, there's an arrow pointing to it, says white girl halo. So the woman who gave the talk says, "But you haven't paused at all to ask me, hey, what do you need? You went straight to fixing, and now you feel great." "I do," says the manager. And her sash says world's best manager. And so the young woman who gave the talk continues, "And now you're the savior, and I'm still here not really fully being heard yet." So now we're back to cultivating meaningful connection. "I think invisibility is one of the most painful experiences I've had in my life. My gut is we need to address this, but I want you to think about what support looks like for you and how we can do this together. More importantly, how I can support you doing this." Okay? It's the same thing that we do with any disenfranchised person or any person who doesn't have legitimacy in the eyes of whomever needs to be addressed. How do you hold space for them to do what they need to do? You doing it for them disempowers them, right? All right, so now we are right here. And the boss says, "And that support can look like whatever you need it to look. I'm sorry that happened. I know how good that work was, and I know how hard you worked to put that together." So now the woman who presented says, "I feel seen and heard. I don't feel disempowered, but it took time, and it took her," meaning the boss, "to be introspective." Then the boss says, "Building narrative trust meant centering her experience over my discomfort and being the learner, not the knower. We both had to be vulnerable and brave." How cool is that? How cool is that? Anybody squirming out there? This is not easy stuff. This is not easy stuff. And we do make mistakes. But this is the kind of thing, this little cartoon, I love it when they give us the words to use. We can modify them to fit ourselves, but how do I show up for someone, not take over the story, hear their story, even if it's really uncomfortable. There might be points when I want to even, demonstrate that. I might wince at some point, whatever, to let them know I'm hearing them, and I'm allowing them the space that they need to work this through. I don't have to fix it. It is not my job to fix it. And in fact, if I try to fix it, I've done them a disservice. I've done them a huge disservice. So I think we'll quit there because that's a lot of stuff to process. Watch this a couple of times. Get the book. For God's sake, get the book. This is an amazing book, Atlas of the Heart. And we, in our desire to be of help to others, especially women, we need practice. We need practice on how to do this and do this well. And as I've said before, self-care is an intimate part of this practice. So I think we're going to do one more day on this. Don't you love this? I started out with, we're going to do this for one day. Good morning, Barb. Glad you're here. And then it was 2 days. And then it was 3 days. And now it's day 4, I think. And now I'm saying I'm going to do one more day. But this is so important. This is such useful stuff. This is the stuff that's going to take our world, which is a hot mess right now, and begin to create the change. When we can connect with people, when we can stay connected, not look away through the comments aren't rolling at all. Oh, interesting. Yeah, this is weird. I'm hoping tomorrow we're back to normal. We'll see. Yes, effective communication. The nonviolent communication stuff is so helpful. Good morning, Bobby. Glad you're here. We're just about done. So you can look up NVC, nonviolent communication. There's a lot of really good stuff there. The taking the war out of our... Oh, and I didn't even lose you guys. Usually when I do that, I lose you guys because I've got a group in 15 minutes. So have an awesome day, y'all. Think about this stuff. Talk to somebody about it. The more we get the word out there, the more of us are going to be practicing this stuff and making a difference in our world. Have an awesome day. We'll see you again tomorrow. Remember, you're capable of far more than you think you are. You are welcome. Bye-bye.